Well, we discussed many of the sort of global challenges and threats that we now face, and we concluded that the current international system has left individuals, communities and even nation states increasingly powerless in the face of these threats and challenges. And the discussion we had, we concluded the system just isn't working either for the Western world, and it certainly isn't working for the global South either. So many of us have always, we've campaigned under the slogan to give people hope of another world is possible. And we increasingly recognise, I think, that to make that other world possible, another internationalism is possible. So I announced way back at the Labour Party conference that we would commence a dialogue on the common risks that we face and the threats that we face, and to discuss the action we need to take. So I said we'd convene an international social forum, and that's what this is. This is the start of a process and a dialogue, starting this year and then building up to scale for next year. Well, the fact is we're coming up to the 25th anniversary of the Conference of the Parties meeting this year, and there's been inadequate progress on climate change. It's one of the features, I think, which is extremely telling. The COP process is still seeking a robust enforcement mechanism to review countries' pledges, as we risk, 3 degrees of warming by 2100. The next century could see us threatened with our very existence, and yet the processes that we've put aside in terms of the institutional mechanisms and the debates have no sense of urgency or emergency. And the international mechanisms, despite the work, for example, of the Nansen Initiative and the Platform of Disaster Displacement, have completely failed to respond to the very challenge at the moment we're facing of climate displacement. I think intertwined with the challenge of climate change, as Costas has said, the rise of the power of multinational corporations. Many of the world's worst emitters of fossil fuels are multinationals. And multinationals, whether through political lobbying, the use of investor-state dispute settlements or other instruments, have chipped away at the power of states, individual states, to tackle climate change and also at their international endeavours. Our international order has failed to rise to the challenge of regulating and restraining the force of transnational corporations, and we see example after example, particularly in the global south, but also even within our own country. We still lack a binding international treaty on business and human rights. International investment agreements have given tools to private actors to reframe regulation extraordinarily as expropriation. And all too often international institutions have remained silent or indifferent to this creeping expansion of corporate power. And all of the international institutions I've mentioned can be criticised for failing to be democratic and representative. International agreements don't always undermine sovereignty. When states come together to reach agreement, they are exercising and pooling their sovereignty. But the work of the IMF, the World Bank and others have diminished the power of people across the globe, contributing to the lack of political agency, especially in the global south. Within the Labour Party in this recent period, we've sketched out a direction of travel in the shape of some of our commitments. And I've said that, for example, as part of our domestic green industrial revolution, technologies developed in the UK, particularly for the climate transition, must be made available free or cheap to the global south. We're consulting with tax experts in government how we might ensure fair taxation of multinationals, so that multinationals are taxed in a way that reflect where their economic activity takes place and where their value is created. Jeremy Corbyn, my friend, the leader of the Labour Party, has committed us to supporting efforts that create, at long last, a legally binding treaty on business and human rights, going beyond the existing voluntary principles. In another area, on overseas loan transparency, the G20 has expressed support for voluntary disclosure. I've said with Dan Carden, who's our Shadow Secretary of State for International Development, we will introduce an Overseas Loan Transparency Act when we go to government, requiring all loans to foreign governments to be registered if they're to be enforced in the UK courts. One of our advisors, as you know, is Joe Stiglitz, and he wrote a report back in 2009 on reforming the international monetary and financial system. He called in that report for the creation of a new body, which he called a Global Economic Coordination Council. That body would sit at the level of a UN General Assembly and the Security Council. It would be a globally representative forum, replacing the unrepresentative G20. It would coordinate the UN system across economic, but also social and environmental fields. It would bring the WTO, currently in crisis, formally into the UN system. Jose Antonio Campo, whose work we've drawn upon in developing our own National Investment Bank for the UK, and Joe Stiglitz both expanded on the proposal more recently. And they said that the Global Economic Coordination Council could play a role in identifying spillovers and finding gaps in existing cooperation. By spillovers, what they mean is challenges that spill across countries as well as across international institutions that currently, in their view, and I agree, work in specific silos. I think it's a proposal that does merit serious consideration and will be part of our discussions today in our coming dialogue.